Well now, good evening, friends. Andy Taylor here. What if I told you that a priceless Civil War medal disappeared from a locked room in the Mayberry Museum? A room with only one door that was bolted from the inside, windows locked from within, and only 5 people in the entire town had keys. And when I finally solved this impossible crime, the answer was so clever and so simple that I wondered how I'd missed it for so long. This is a story about how things that seem impossible usually have a logical explanation, about trust and suspicion, and about how the solution to a mystery is often hiding in plain sight. It started on a Monday morning in May of 1963 when George Hamilton, the director of the Mayberry Museum, called me in a state of panic. "Sheriff," he said, "the Confederate medal is gone. You need to come immediately." I drove to the museum on Elm Street. The medal had been on loan from a private collector for a special Civil War centennial exhibition. It was a rare Confederate Medal of Honor, one of only a handful known to exist, valued at $25,000. George led me to the exhibition room on the second floor. It was a small room, perhaps 12 feet by 15 feet, with a single wooden door and 2 windows. The door had a heavy bolt on the inside and a key lock on the outside. The windows locked with metal latches from the inside. The medal had been displayed in a glass case in the center of the room. The case was intact but empty. George explained what had happened. He'd locked the room himself at 6 o'clock the previous evening. He'd checked the display, exited, locked the door from outside, and gone home. This morning at 9, when he unlocked the door, he found the medal missing. I examined the room carefully. The door showed no tampering. The bolt on the inside was still locked, which meant whoever took the medal had somehow locked it from outside after leaving. Both windows were locked from inside with their latches firmly in place. The windows were painted shut and clearly hadn't been opened in years. There was no other way in or out. No secret passages, no hidden doors. It was a completely sealed room. And yet the medal was gone. "George," I said, "who has keys to this room?" He pulled out a key ring. "There are only 5 keys. I have one. Walter Jenkins, our security guard, has one. Mayor Pike has one. Miss Johnson, our curator, has one. And you have one, Sheriff. Those are the only 5 keys that exist. The locks were changed just last month for this exhibition." I examined my own key. "So one of the 5 of us took the medal?" George looked miserable. "I don't want to believe that, but I don't see any other explanation." I shook my head. Picking the lock wouldn't help with that bolt. That bolt can only be locked from inside the room. Whoever took the medal had to have been inside the room and had to have a key to get in. Over the next hours, I interviewed each key holder. George Hamilton had been museum director for 15 years and was devastated. His alibi was that he'd gone straight home after locking the museum at 6, had dinner with his wife, and spent the evening reading. Walter Jenkins, the security guard, was insulted by the implication. "I've guarded this building for 10 years, he said. "Never lost a thing. Why would I risk everything for a medal I couldn't even sell?" His alibi was that he'd left at 6:15, gone home, and watched television alone. Mayor Pike was defensive. "I barely visit the museum," he said. "I certainly didn't steal a medal." His alibi was a town council meeting until 8, confirmed by witnesses. Miss Johnson, the curator, was upset but excited by the mystery. "Sheriff," she said, This is a classic locked room problem. I left at 5:30, went to the library, then home by 7. The librarian confirmed this. That left me. I knew I hadn't taken it, which meant one of the others was lying, or I was missing something about how the room could be accessed. I examined the room again more carefully. I measured it, checked for irregularities in walls or floor, examined the ceiling. Nothing. It was simply a locked room with no secret ways in or out. Barney had theories. What if someone hid in the room before it was locked, took the metal, then somehow escaped? But that doesn't work, I said. The bolt was locked from inside when we found it. If someone left, they couldn't have locked that bolt behind them. Barney suggested an accomplice with strings or sticks to manipulate the bolt from outside. But I couldn't see how that would work physically. I thought about it logically. If the room was truly sealed, the metal had to have been taken before it was locked. That meant George, the last person inside. But George had the most to lose. I checked his finances discreetly. Nothing unusual. Same with Walter. Mayor Pike was well off. Miss Johnson lived modestly, but seemed content. No financial motives. That evening, I stared at the 5 keys on my desk. 5 keys to a locked room, and one had been used to commit an impossible theft. I thought about the timeline. George locked the room at 6. The museum closed at 5. I called Miss Johnson. Did you see the metal before you left at 5:30? Actually, she said, I didn't go into that room yesterday at all. So the last person who could confirm the metal was there before locking was George. I called him. George, when you locked the room at 6, did you actually look at the metal? He hesitated. Well, no, not closely. I looked in the room, saw the case was intact, and locked the door. An idea formed. What if the metal had been taken earlier in the day, before the room was locked? But the museum had been open to the public until 5. The glass case was locked. I called George again. The display case, was it locked? Yes, he said. I have the key. Nobody else does. I checked this morning when I found the metal gone. The case was still locked, no tampering. I went back to the museum and examined the glass case. It was a simple glass box with a wooden base and a small lock. I asked George to unlock it. Inside, there were smudges on the glass. George, when did you last clean inside this case? A few days before the metal arrived, he said. So these smudges happened after the metal was placed inside. I thought differently. What if the theft hadn't happened the way everyone assumed? What if someone never needed to unlock anything because they'd never actually locked it properly in the first place? I asked George to show me exactly what he'd done when locking up. He demonstrated walking to the door, stepping outside, but stopped. I can't show you because the bolt is inside and I'm outside. Exactly, I said. George, when you locked this room yesterday at 6, was the bolt already in the locked position? He thought carefully. Yes, it was already locked. So you didn't lock the bolt yourself yesterday? No, he said slowly. It was already locked. Which means someone locked it earlier while people were still in the museum. Miss Johnson, did you lock the bolt yesterday? No, she said, I never touch it. Only George does that at closing. Walter, not my job, he said. George, think back to yesterday morning. When you opened at 9, was the bolt already locked? He frowned. I don't think so. I usually unlock just the door. If the bolt is locked, I notice it. Yesterday morning, the bolt wasn't locked. So sometime during the day, between 9 and 6, someone locked that bolt, which means someone was inside the room during hours and locked themselves in. But we were open to the public, George protested. People were in and out all day. Nobody could have locked themselves in without being noticed. Unless I said they locked the bolt during a moment when nobody else was in the room, took the metal from the case, and then simply walked out pulling the door shut behind them, leaving the bolt locked from inside. But the door was still locked with a key from outside when you arrived this morning. George looked confused. When I arrived, he said slowly, I didn't try to open the door first. I automatically put my key in and turned it, like I do every morning. So if the door had been closed, but not actually locked, he wouldn't have known because you locked it yourself when you arrived. His face went pale. You mean I locked an unlocked door, thinking I was unlocking a locked door? Exactly. Here's what happened. Someone came during regular hours, entered this room during a quiet moment, locked the bolt from inside so they wouldn't be interrupted, picked the lock on the glass case, which isn't sophisticated, took the metal, and walked out pulling the door closed, but not locking it with a key. The bolt remained locked from inside. When you arrived this morning and turned your key, you actually locked an unlocked door. You assumed you were unlocking it because that's what you expected. But who? George asked. Someone who can pick locks, I said. Someone who was here yesterday during operating hours. Someone who knew about that bolt and how it would create a locked room mystery. George checked his visitor log. We had about 20 visitors yesterday. Most were townspeople I recognized. But there was one stranger, a man who said he was a Civil War historian. He spent about an hour here in the afternoon. Did he go into the exhibition room? Miss Johnson nodded. Yes, he was very interested in the metal, asked detailed questions. He was in that room for 15 or 20 minutes, mostly alone. I asked for a description. Middle-aged man, beard, glasses, dressed like a professor. Said his name was Dr. Fletcher. I called the state police with the description. Within a day, they'd identified him. Martin Fletcher, a known art and antiquities thief with a record of stealing from small museums. He was caught 3 days, later trying to sell the metal in Virginia. When questioned, he confirmed my theory. He'd visited the museum, assessed the security, realized the glass case lock was simple to pick, and noticed the bolt. He'd waited for a quiet moment, locked himself in using the bolt, picked the case lock, taken the metal, and walked out pulling the door closed but not locking it. He'd gambled that whoever opened the room next morning would automatically use their key without checking if the door was actually locked. It worked perfectly, creating what looked like an impossible locked room theft when it was quite straightforward. The metal was returned, and new security measures were implemented. A real alarm system, better locks, and procedures to actually check security rather than assuming it. George was embarrassed that his automatic behavior had contributed to the confusion, but I assured him it was natural. We do things by habit. Fletcher had counted on that. The case taught me something about impossible crimes. They're never actually impossible. There's always a logical explanation, usually involving misdirection, making people think something happened one way when it actually happened another. Everyone assumed the theft happened after the museum closed because of the locked bolt. But the bolt worked in the thief's favor. By locking it himself from inside, Fletcher made people focus on the impossible question of how someone could have stolen from a locked room, when the real question was when the metal was stolen. The answer was during operating hours, when the room wasn't truly locked. The locked bolt was theater, designed to create confusion. It worked until someone thought through the timeline and questioned assumptions. The clues were all there. The bolt locked earlier in the day, unusual for George's routine. The door showing no signs of being locked when opened because it hadn't been locked. The stranger who spent significant time alone in the exhibition room. Fletcher had been clever, but not clever enough for methodical detective work that questioned every assumption. The locked room mystery became a legend in town, a story about how things aren't always what they seem. George put a small plaque in the exhibition room, explaining what happened and how it was solved, turning the theft into an educational exhibit about logical thinking and questioning assumptions. Well now, that's the story of the impossible theft that wasn't impossible at all, just cleverly planned by someone who understood human nature and misdirection. It's a reminder that when something seems impossible, the answer usually isn't magic, but logic and observation. Most mysteries have solutions if we're willing to question assumptions and think through details methodically. The locked room wasn't locked when the theft happened. It just looked locked later, which was enough to create confusion. If you ever face something that seems impossible, remember this story. Look for the assumptions you're making. Question the timing. Think about what you know versus what you're assuming. The impossible becomes possible once you understand what really happened rather than what appeared to happen. The best magic tricks aren't about doing the impossible, but about making the possible look impossible through misdirection and timing. Come back and visit again real soon, friends. Until then, this is Andy Taylor saying good night from Mayberry. Remember, the solution to an impossible problem is usually simpler than you think. You just have to be willing to question everything you assume you know. Take care now.